Hello, my name is Jim Kemple, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Research Alliance for New York City Schools based at New York University. I'd like to talk to you today about a path-breaking study we're conducting focusing on career technical education as it's been implemented in New York City. Working in collaboration with the New York City Department of Education and with co-principal investigators Sean Doherty from Vanderbilt University and Rebecca Unterman from MDRC. And you'll see listed on this first slide a list of the key players in our evaluation and research project focusing on New York City. The study is a 5-year study begun in 2017 that has 5 core components. The first is an assessment of the implementation and the quality of the CTE programs that have been developed in New York City over the last 5 years. We're also examining the patterns by which students choose and enroll in career and technical education programs, and importantly, measuring their exposure to the various components of career and technical education. Third, we're going to estimate the impacts of career and technical education on a wide range of outcomes that students achieve during high school and as they make the transition to post-secondary education and employment. The fourth component brings together the implementation analysis with our impact analysis to identify factors that enhance or limit the effectiveness of career and technical education, both based on the characteristics of the programs in which students enroll and in their experiences in those programs over the time that they're in high school. And then finally, we'll be assessing the net costs of career and technical education over and above general education programs, as well as the cost effectiveness of our career and technical education programs. It's important to recognize that this study is not intended as an assessment of New York City's career and technical education system, nor of CTE's overall efficacy. Rather, we're looking to identify the conditions under which CTE may be most effective for whom and under what conditions, particularly as it prepares young people for college and careers. The study is supported by grants from the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education, as well as a grant from the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. Today, I'd like to talk about 4 areas that I think make New York City an especially rich context within which to build evidence about how CTE works, for whom, and under what conditions. So let's turn to the policy context. In particular, New York City, while our study is designed to try to inform policy and practice in New York City, the context here in New York City also provides opportunities to assess the implementation and impact of recent federal and state legislation, all of which have been aimed at strengthening career and technical education generally. In fact, in 2012, the comptroller for New York City, now Mayor Bill de Blasio, issued a report called A Path to the Future, which anticipated the most recent reauthorization of the Perkins Act at the federal level, all of which were aimed at strengthening the CTE goals for college and career readiness, promoting innovation, and enhancing accountability for CTE implementation. Both New York State and New York City require that all students have access to career and technical education. And CTE in New York State and in New York City are offered in the form of what are called programs of study, which include 5 core elements. A sequence of at least 3 courses that students take while they're in high school that are designed around a career theme. And those courses have been vetted by experts in the industry or in the fields in which the CTE program focuses. All programs are required to provide students with work-based learning opportunities in that field of study. The programs are required to be staffed by teachers with appropriate state certification, licenses, and pre-existing industry experience, particularly those teachers teaching the career and technical education courses. Programs are required to provide students with opportunities to earn industry certified credentials and licenses, as well as opportunities and relationships with post-secondary education institutions so that students can earn college credit while they're still in high school. The New York City context is also distinctive in the kinds of data that are available to document both the characteristics and the quality of CTE programs and their adherence to implementation standards. Let me turn now to the scale and diversity of CTE program in New York City in particular. what we're also going to focus on is the fact that in the New York City context provides distinct opportunities to study the substantial variation in implementation conditions, career foci, and program quality and completeness, so that we'll learn much more about the conditions under which CTE is most or least effective. The CTE landscape in New York City has evolved pretty dramatically over the last 10 years. This study will focus on the last 5 years of CTE program in New York City, but between 2008 and 2017, New York City offered a total of 534 CTE programs of study in more than 180 of their more than 450 high schools. The number of CTE programs during this period increased dramatically as the district expanded high school options generally for students, but more importantly, emphasize CTE in particular as an expanded set of options for young people as they're making the transition from middle to high school. After 2013, over 150 CTE programs of study were removed from rosters and options for students, both because of some lack of documentation that they were in fact operating at the standards that the district held out, or that programs had been in declining demand from students. So this was an effort at more quality control. And you'll see in the following picture how there were 281 distinct programs of study offered in two different kinds of contexts. One context being high schools that were fully dedicated to offering CTE programs of study, represented by the light blue bar in this picture, and high schools that were academic high schools offering a mix of CTE programs and regular academic programs. The district saw an increase in both the CTE dedicated high school programs as well as the academic high schools, although most of the decline in the CTE offerings were concentrated among the programs they offered in academic settings. This study, as I said, will focus on the period between 2013 and 2017, when the district offered a total of 281 CTE programs of study in 124 of its more than 450 high schools. 128 of those CTE programs were offered in 46 CTE dedicated high schools, and the remaining 153 were offered in 78 academic high schools. All 6 of the state-defined career clusters, which encompass the 16 federal career clusters, are represented in the sample of CTE programs from New York City. About 55% of those programs are in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, led by engineering and technology, 13% in business and finance, and 13% in the arts. The annual documentation that we've been able to collect for these data captures the variation in the completeness of implementation and the quality of the CTE elements. This picture, this map of the 5 boroughs of New York City give you a sense for the distribution of the CTE dedicated high schools and the academic high schools offering CTE, which are the colored dots on the graph, the CTE high schools represented in light blue, and the academic high schools offering CTE in the orange, and then the open circles for the remaining high schools in the New York City public school system. This picture shows you the distribution in both the CTE dedicated high schools and the academic high schools by career theme, and these are the 5 state identified career clusters. Again, these are encompassing the 16 federal clusters, where you see the CTE dedicated high schools having a much heavier emphasis on technology and engineering, while the academic high schools are more evenly distributed across 4 of the 6 career clusters. Let's turn now to the system of student choice and enrollment, which in the New York City context provides the basis for well-specified randomized controlled trials, as well as regression discontinuity study designs that help us estimate the impacts of CTE with an unusual degree of validity and reliability. So each year, and again, this will focus on on the time period from 2013 to 17, each year nearly 80,000 8th grade students apply for high schools, and they're allowed to list up to 12 program preferences in their applications. A full 80% of those students list at least one CTE program among their 12 choices, and 62% of those applicants expressed a very high level of interest by listing a CTE program in all 3 of their top 3 choices, of their top choices, or a moderate level in which they listed at least one CTE program among their top 3 choices. In all, each year, more than 23,000 students are ultimately assigned to a program that offers career and technical education, which represents about 30% of all students who enroll in a New York City high school. This level of interest in CTE, however, varied tremendously by student background characteristics, as you can see in this graph here, where the blue section of each of these bars represents the percentage of students in each group that expressed that high level of interest in CTE, which was representing a CTE choice in all of their top 3 options, or a moderate level where at least one of their top 3 choices was a CTE program of study. White and female students had also a fairly high level, although lower than those other groups. The third piece of the New York City context is the available data, which provide opportunities for us to assess program implementation and quality, as well as the outcomes on which programs should have or may have an impact, as well as on the program's cost effectiveness. In particular, the data provided to us include annual performance assessment forms that list the course requirements or the course sequences that are offered within programs, information about teacher certification, the industry partners, the work-based learning opportunities that are afforded for students, post-secondary articulation agreements, as well as the industry credential offerings. The study team has been able to develop methods for scraping data from those performance assessment programs and cross-validating them based on our collaboration with the New York City Department of Education. These forms are also used for the programs to apply for state certification, which provides further information about CTE program capacity and quality. And altogether, the variation in CTE program characteristics, their implementation contexts, and their quality allows us to identify factors associated with variation in CTE impacts and in student outcomes. Another important source of data for us is at the individual student level, assessing their exposure to the key elements of the program offerings. We're able to measure students' enrollment in CTE programs and their persistence in those programs. We know and we'll be able to measure the number of credits students are earning while they're in high school in the CTE sequences that are offered in the programs. We can also assess student participation in paid internships and other work-based learning opportunities. We can measure the students' acquisition of industry certification or credentials, as well as their enrollment in post-secondary education courses and earning credits toward a college degree while they're still in high school. And ultimately, we'll be able to find out their students' progress toward a New York State CTE diploma or a regular high school Regents diploma. We're also able to assess a number of important student outcomes to understand the impact of CTE on those outcomes, including administrative records that capture students' overall course and credit accumulation while they're in high school, their completion of end-of-course exams that are required for graduation in New York State, students' attendance and absenteeism, their involvement with the disciplinary system in schools, including the incidents and suspensions that may occur for students, ultimately their achievement of a high school diploma and the different types of diplomas that are available to students in New York City. We'll also be able to follow students into and through college and their enrollment in 2- and 4-year college opportunities. Ultimately, we hope to collect data that will enable us to measure students' participation in the labor market after they leave high schools. And then finally, we'll be able to measure the net costs of career and technical education by looking at school-based expenditure reports, state-required spending and transparency reports that are required for the district to report to the New York State Education Department. We'll be able to measure per pupil expenditures, instructional supports, and in non-personnel supports. We'll also be able to track revenue from federal, state, and local taxes, as well as from foundations and private sources. For further information, you can contact the principal investigators, myself, Sean Doherty, or Rebecca Unterman, as well as visiting the Research Alliance website for more information about this study. And again, I'd like to recognize the important contribution and collaboration that we received from the New York City Department of Education, the The CTE team at the NYC DOE has been a thought partner in both helping to design the study and make sense of our findings and to inform the various aspects of our data collection. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful.